Have you ever wondered why an entire museum, created to celebrate one of the greatest icons of American culture, Roy Rogers, the legendary King of the Cowboys, ended up closing its doors forever, with no chance of reopening? This story is far from simple, and the deeper we dive into it, the more controversy and mystery we uncover. Behind the charming smile, the clean image of a silver screen hero, and the immortal aura that Hollywood built around him, lies a narrative of declining interest, financial mismanagement, internal family disputes, and a culture that simply stopped recognizing the importance of its own symbols. For some, the Roy Rogers Museum was an inevitable victim of time and modernity, as younger audiences no longer connected with the image of the cowboy in the white hat. For others, the real problem was a lack of vision and leadership, turning what should have been a celebration into an unsustainable burden. And there are harsher voices still, whispering uncomfortable truths. Was Roy Rogers' legacy truly preserved, or was it gradually sold off piece by piece at high-profile auctions? What happened to priceless relics like Trigger, the most famous horse in Western history? How did Bullet, the faithful dog, end up as just another item on an auction list? And how did a collection that should have been part of America's cultural heritage become fragmented, scattered, and in many cases locked away in private collections far from public view? These questions force us to reflect on how well America really preserves its own memory. That's why I'm asking you right now, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. This is not just a symbolic gesture. On YouTube, every subscription tells the platform that this kind of content deserves to reach more people, and that's how stories like this one don't fade into oblivion. If you're already subscribed, smash that like button, because that simple click is the most powerful way to let the algorithm know this video is worth sharing. And if you'd like to support the channel even more, you can send a super thanks, which helps me keep creating deep investigations like this one. But if that's not possible, no problem at all, just leave a comment telling me what shocked you the most, because your voice is just as important as any financial support. Now, I'll just ask you one more thing, stay with me until the end. Because the final revelation about the closure of the Roy Rogers Museum isn't just shocking, it will completely change the way you see the relationship between memory, culture, and how America treats its own heroes. Now, close your eyes and imagine with me, a deserted road, far away from the noise of modern cities. The endless blue sky above, the soft wind blowing, and the dusty air carrying the smell of old Wild West trails. You drive in silence, almost hypnotized by the vastness, until a roadside sign announces a special destination, the Roy Rogers Museum. For many travelers, this wasn't just a building, but a sanctuary, a place where time seemed to stand still. Inside, it wasn't only objects being preserved, but an entire era, a living piece of American culture centered on one of the greatest entertainment icons of the 20th century. Roy Rogers was born Leonard Franklin Sly on November 5, 1911, in Cincinnati, Ohio. The son of Mattie and Andrew "Andy" Sly, he grew up in a humble family that was always chasing better opportunities. Little Leonard knew nothing of luxury. As a baby, he lived with his parents and sisters in a makeshift tent on 2nd Street, which would later become the site of Riverfront Stadium. Years later, he often joked that he had been born on second base, destined for greatness from the start. But in reality, his childhood was much closer to hardship than to fame. Andy Sly was not a city man. Factory work exhausted and frustrated him. Determined to change his life, he and his brother Will had the bold idea of building a houseboat from salvaged wood. It was a modest vessel, barely 40 feet long, but for the family, it represented freedom. In July 1912, the Slyes set off down the Ohio River, dreaming of a new life in Portsmouth. Picture the scene, young Leonard, still a child, watching the sun reflect on the water, rocking to the boat's sway as if it were a cradle, learning early on that life was made of change and improvisation. But the adventure soon met obstacles. In 1913, a major flood forced the family to haul the boat onto dry land, where they continued living until they found stability. By 1919, they had purchased a farm in Duck Run, near Lucasville, Ohio. They built a 6-room house and seemed ready for a more settled life, but Andy quickly realized farming would not provide enough. To keep the family afloat, he returned to working in a shoe factory in Portsmouth, coming home on weekends. It was during these returns that he brought gifts for his children, and one of them would change Leonard's life forever, a horse. This wasn't just a pet. It was Leonard's first step into the cowboy world. Each ride taught him lessons of courage, freedom, and discipline. Without knowing it, Leonard was beginning the bond with horses that would later define his career, most notably with Trigger, the horse that became nearly as famous as Roy himself. Since the family had no radio or television, they created their own entertainment. On Saturday nights, neighbors gathered for square dances. Leonard sang, played the mandolin, and even called out the dance steps. It was the essence of rural life, simple, joyful, and communal. It was in this environment that Leonard discovered his musical talent, even learning to yodel with his mother. What seemed like a farm game soon became one of his trademarks as a performer. As Leonard grew older, life demanded difficult choices. He started high school in McDermott, Ohio, but when the family moved back to Cincinnati, he had to quit and work alongside his father in the shoe factory. He tried night school, but exhaustion was stronger than ambition, and soon he dropped out. He was a young man with no diploma, but with the kind of life experience that builds resilience. When the Great Depression hit, the Slyas, like so many other families, looked west to California for new opportunities. In 1930, they settled in Lawndale, near Los Angeles, and Leonard found work in peach orchards and road construction. Life was harsh, lived in migrant camps that looked exactly like the ones later described in The Grapes of Wrath. These experiences shaped him into someone close to ordinary people, a trait that would become part of his artistic persona, the humble cowboy, human and approachable, unlike the arrogant or distant heroes on screen. Everything started to change in 1931, when his sister Mary encouraged him to audition for a local radio show called Midnight Frolic. Shy by nature, Leonard hesitated, but he eventually agreed. Wearing a western shirt his sister had sewn and carrying his guitar, he sang, played, and even yodeled. The reaction was immediate. He was invited to join the group Rocky Mountaineers. That was the doorway to the world of country music. Soon after, Leonard joined Bob Nolan and Tim Spencer to form the Sons of the Pioneers in 1933. Together, they created hits like Tumbling Tumbleweeds and Cool Water, songs that became staples of American music. The group quickly moved beyond local radio and became a national sensation. The name Leonard Franklin Sly began to fade, replaced by a new identity that would make history, Roy Rogers. The transition to cinema came naturally. In 1938, Gene Autry, then Hollywood's top singing cowboy, clashed with studios over salary demands. Republic Pictures launched a search for a new star. Leonard was chosen, and to make him more marketable, he was given a stage name, Roy Rogers, inspired by humorist Will Rogers. His first major film, Under Western Stars, catapulted him into stardom. Almost overnight, the boy who grew up in makeshift houses and poor Ohio farms became the hero of millions. Roy wasn't just an actor or singer, he embodied the perfect cowboy image, brave, honest, cheerful, and approachable. Children adored him, adults respected him, and Hollywood recognized him as a star of incalculable value. By the late 1930s and into the 1940s, Roy Rogers wasn't simply promising, he was one of the biggest names in Western films. While other stars portrayed rough, morally ambiguous cowboys, Roy brought audiences something different, the clean-cut cowboy in the white hat, always smiling, always standing on the side of justice. In a world still reeling from the Great Depression and on the verge of World War II, this kind of hero represented hope, stability, and solid values. He was a cowboy who won not just with a gun, but with integrity. The formula worked. For 16 consecutive years, Roy ranked among the top 10 box office stars in Hollywood, leading the list in several of those years. His films were unique, lighthearted, colorful, filled with songs and family-friendly adventures. Kids, especially, adored him. And then there was Trigger, his Palomino horse, who almost stole the show. Trigger wasn't just a sidekick, he was an icon in his own right, as charismatic and beloved as Roy himself. Roy was no fool in business either. In 1940, he secured a contract clause giving him rights over his own name, likeness, and voice for merchandising. This visionary move turned his career into a merchandising empire. Toys, comic books, games, lunchboxes, clothes, radio shows, and later television, Roy Rogers became not just a star, but a brand. In this arena, he rivaled only Walt Disney in commercial reach. But Roy's personal life was also transforming. In 1944, while filming, he met Dale Evans, a talented actress and singer who would become not only his professional partner but his life partner. United by music, movies, and faith, Roy and Dale became one of Hollywood's most admired couples. They sang together, performed on television, and shared the conviction that fame should be used to inspire. Their bond was so strong that, in 1951, they created The Roy Rogers Show. In it, they sang the song that became their signature, Happy Trails. More than just a farewell tune, it was an anthem of optimism, a way of telling audiences that no matter the obstacles, life should be lived with hope. The public loved it, and Roy and Dale came to symbolize not just Western entertainment, but also family and faith. Yet their life together was not free of heartbreak. They lost children in tragic circumstances, pain that could have destroyed them. Instead, they transformed grief into mission, dedicating themselves to supporting orphans and children with disabilities. This often overlooked part of their story shows that they were more than celebrities, they were people of faith, resilience, and compassion. By the 1960s, Roy and Dale saw the classic Western genre losing ground. Television had taken over, new genres were rising, and the old cowboy image was slipping into nostalgia. Still, they wanted to ensure their story and values wouldn't be forgotten. That's when the idea of the museum was born. In 1967, in Apple Valley, California, Roy and Dale opened the Roy Rogers and Dale Evans Museum. But this was not just a collection of souvenirs, it was a true sanctuary of memory. Original film costumes, hand-embroidered saddles, guitars used in recordings, rare posters, personal letters, and of course Trigger and Bullet, preserved through taxidermy, were all on display. For some, the choice to preserve the animals was controversial, but for Roy it symbolized love and loyalty, an attempt to make eternal the companions who had walked every step of fame by his side. Visiting the museum felt like stepping inside a time capsule. Families traveled long distances to bring their children and relive a world that had once captivated generations. For many, walking among those glass cases felt like stepping back into childhood, reconnecting with values that seemed lost in the noise of modern life. The museum was not only about Roy Rogers, it was about an era when courage, kindness, and justice always wore a white hat. For decades, the museum prospered, becoming a pilgrimage site for fans. But as time passed, the glow of the Western began to fade. The genre that once dominated movie theaters, radios, and comic books was now considered outdated. Children no longer dreamed of playing cops and robbers in cowboy hats, they wanted to wear superhero capes, hold lightsabers, and imagine superpowers. The cowboy who once stood as a national symbol of bravery and simplicity was slowly becoming just nostalgia. This shift struck the museum directly. For years, families traveled miles just to see Trigger up close, to marvel at Bullet's display, or to admire Dale's gowns and Roy's guitars. But gradually, the crowds thinned. The corridors that once echoed with laughter, conversations, and camera clicks grew quieter. The older fans passed away, and the younger generations no longer understood why a stuffed horse mattered so much. Roy, though always a dreamer, was pragmatic too. He had left a clear instruction: if the museum could not sustain itself financially, it should close. Memory, he believed, must be a celebration, not a burden of debt and obligation. So the family tried to keep it alive. The museum first moved from Apple Valley to Victorville, California, seeking new audiences. Later, in the early 2000s, they made their boldest move, relocating the entire collection to Branson, Missouri, a city famous for country music shows, family attractions, and theaters. At first, it seemed promising. The new building was bigger, the exhibits more modern, and Roy and Dale's story was retold with renewed energy. But enthusiasm didn't last. The new generation still didn't connect with the cowboy image, and the costs of maintaining the museum were enormous. Year after year, expenses mounted, while visitors dwindled. In December 2009, after much struggle, the inevitable decision came: the Roy Rogers, Dale Evans Museum would close its doors forever. If closure itself was heartbreaking, what came next was even more shocking. In July 2010, following Roy's wishes, the entire collection was auctioned off by Christie's. One by one, the treasures of Roy and Dale were dismantled and scattered. Trigger was sold for over $260,000 to a rural television network. Bullet, the loyal German Shepherd, was sold as well. Buttermilk, Dale's horse, shared the same fate. Lavish costumes, guitars, film props, awards, furniture, even Roy's iconic 1964 Bonneville car, everything went to private collectors. For some buyers, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. For the fans, it was nothing less than the dismantling of an altar. Many described the auction as a second death, not just of Roy Rogers, who had passed in 1998, but of the legend itself, broken apart piece by piece under the auctioneer's hammer. Reactions were immediate and polarized. Some accused the family of greed, of turning memory into merchandise. Others defended them, pointing out that Roy had always been clear: he didn't want the museum to become a financial burden. Still, for the public, watching Trigger and Bullet sold off like ordinary objects was devastating. Rumors spread quickly. Whispers of family disputes. Claims of mismanagement. Suggestions that missed opportunities for partnerships with major institutions had doomed the museum. None of it was ever fully confirmed, but the suspicion only deepened the pain. And yet, not everything was lost. The Autry Museum of the American West in Los Angeles acquired important pieces of the collection, ensuring at least part of Roy and Dale's legacy would remain accessible to the public. But the essence, the unity, was gone. What had once been a single house of memory was now scattered fragments, locked away in private homes or hidden behind glass in distant museums. The closing of the Roy Rogers Museum was both predictable and tragic. Predictable, because Roy himself had prepared for it. Tragic, because no fan was truly ready to say goodbye. For many, that auction marked the end of an era, a painful reminder that even the brightest icons cannot outlive time without reinvention. When the museum closed, it wasn't just a building that disappeared. It was as if an entire chapter of American culture had been erased in plain sight. The cowboy, once the ultimate national hero, was now only a faded memory, fragmented across collections. And this raises uncomfortable questions. Who owns memory? Should it remain in the hands of a family, or does it belong to the collective public when a figure has shaped generations? Could the museum have survived with better vision, stronger leadership, or more creative reinvention? Or was its fall simply inevitable, a victim of a culture that had moved on? Compared to Graceland, which still thrives with Elvis Presley fans, or even museums dedicated to superheroes, Roy's story feels even more tragic. Elvis still symbolizes rebellion and youth. The cowboy, however, failed to bridge the gap into modern times. And without reinvention, nostalgia was not enough to save it. But here lies the deepest lesson: memory is fragile. Objects, photos, films, they are attempts to freeze time. Yet without collective effort to keep the flame alive, even the greatest icons fade. Roy Rogers wasn't just a cowboy on screen. He was a father, a husband, a man of faith, someone who turned personal tragedy into compassion. And still, even with a museum built to immortalize him, his legacy fell victim to the erosion of time. And maybe that is the true legacy of the Roy Rogers Museum: eternity does not exist on its own. It must be built, reinvented, and passed from one generation to the next. The cowboy who once symbolized America became a memory for a few because that bridge between past and future was never built. But his memory isn't gone. It simply needs new storytellers. And that's where you come in. Yes, you watching this right now. Every time someone sings Happy Trails, shares a Roy Rogers story, or replays one of his films, a piece of that legacy lives again. The museum may have closed, but memory only truly dies when it is no longer told. Roy Rogers wasn't just a movie star, he was a reflection of a time when heroes were simple, honest, and carried values we still need today. And in a fast, distracted world, maybe that's his greatest lesson: courage, kindness, and faith never go out of style. So as we close this video, I want to ask you, what shocked you most about this story? Do you think the museum should have survived, or was its end inevitable? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, I read every one of them. And don't forget, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, because that's what tells YouTube this kind of story deserves to reach more people. If you want to go even further, you can send a super thanks to help me keep making deep dives like this. But even if you can't, your voice in the comments is just as powerful. And before you leave, don't click away yet. The video appearing on your screen right now is even more fascinating than this one, and I promise, you'll be hooked until the very last second. I'll see you there.